Welcome to another Davinci Resolve tips and tricks. In this episode we're gonna be talking about saturation and at least 4 to 5 ways of tackling saturation within Davinci Resolve. Actually, let me disable all these nodes here. So this is the Rec 709 that I get. You have the IDT here at the clip level and the ODT with nothing else, no look applied. So this image, what I did is bring it back to exposure a little bit better, the ratio, certain contrast that I like, and we talked about contrast last time. And I decided this was shot with the white balance, a bit towards the coolest tones. So I decided to balance it to more neutral. Let me grab just the vector scope so you can see what the balance is doing. So this is mostly in the quarter of the blues and cyans with a bit of course she's blonde, red lips and skin tone, so trying to go towards where it should belong. I maximize color separation, right? But you can see this mostly in the blue quadrant, and by moving this, by neutralizing those blue, I have steel blue, which is her jacket. I have greens, which is the whole greenery behind. I have the skin tones here. So, in terms of color separation, this is looking already much better. So balancing the image first is key before adding or subtracting any saturation, as these values will get magnified or decreased. And that's why I always do the balancing first, right after exposure. Sometimes, if I see an image like this, I need to balance it first. If that's what I want to do, there's nothing wrong with this image. But for the examples that I want to show in saturation, I think this is a good clip to show you that first you need to tackle the balance before deciding about saturation. Because this is too blue, I say okay, I will need to saturate, introduce some warmth, but actually by balancing it you're already creating that separation, and maybe decide that these colors don't need any saturation at all and you can leave them like that, just needed balancing first. So before starting this episode about saturation, do balance and add contrast before starting saturation. I'm gonna give you another tip from the back of the last episode that I don't think I mentioned it. So this ratio was done just by keeping the pivot while working on Davinci Resolve white gamut. So the middle gray in this color space, the pivot is 336, and I added contrast, linear contrast with the contrast knob. And that by default, you can see that by adding that contrast, and you can see here in the vector scope that the colors tend to increase. So we're literally, by adding contrast, sort of saturating the image at the same time. The mass of this is a vector scope, so we are analyzing color. Of course, the waveform, we're expanding those black and white points, but vector scope wise, we're also, pushing the colors. You can see how more dense this blue is getting, for example, and the greens behind, etc. But what if you want to add contrast without adding more saturation? Well, you can come to the HDR palette here, and as I add a little bit of contrast, you can see that, let me disable, the change here in the colors is not as dramatic. It's very little what changes compared to what the contrast in the primaries does. So if you want to add contrast without pushing or saturating the colors, maybe because the colors are already too saturated, depending on what you shoot, if you're working with color lights or whatever the situation is, that the Rec 709 is already quite saturated and you want to add some punch but not increase the colors, then the HDR contrast is your tool. That's a tip that I forgot to add in the previous contrast video. And now let's start with saturation. Cool. So we talk about contrast and balance, and just to reiterate about balance, that it's not always to bring back an image to to make the whitest white, because that may not be the intention of the DP cinematographer. But yes, my personal aim with the balance, and I, as I said before, I use the offset wheel as an overall balancing of the image, not pushing certain colors in different areas, in the shadows, in the highlights. Just an overall balance is to try to maximize the color separation of the image. Yeah, once more, all towards blue, and this is more neutral, and by neutralizing it, we're realizing that we are heavy in 3 quadrants, not in the magenta, and that's probably for good because we don't want magenta-ish skin tones. So we are clearly on the greens here, strong blues, and all the rest of the skin tones and hair here in the red and yellow, more towards the red quadrant. So that's the aim, to separate, to maximize color separation. So once we get to this point, exposure, contrast, or the ratio of the contrast and the balance, then it puts me in a better position to start pushing these colors and saturate them or desaturate them. And I'm gonna show you about 3 to 4, maybe 4 with an extra 5 ways of tackling saturation within Davinci Resolve. The easiest one, I'm gonna leave this up here, I'm gonna probably get it bigger. The most common is here in the primaries wheel, we have saturation. Yeah, so it's a dedicated saturation parameter for us to manipulate. So as I push this saturation, let's go say 75, and I'm gonna do before and after. If you stay here for long enough, looking here, when I disable the node, you're gonna realize that it was too desaturated before, or maybe it wasn't, but it's because now your eyes are used to seeing what you're seeing right now. Yeah, so when I say, oh, this is almost black and white, yeah, on what's the log image now. So if you go from a log image, right, to just a Rec 09 with exposure ratio and balance control, it's like, it does look good. And then we have saturation, it's like, oh, colors are popping, maybe I like it. Oh, to the saturate is, I got a colleague that stands up, walks around, and comes back after 10 seconds and look at the monitor again after doing a change. So if you were to do that for every change you do to an image, probably you spend the whole day just grading one single shot. So although it's good for the eyes, I don't recommend that technique. Kidding. Cool. So we can see that all the colors are being saturated in an equal manner, and I'm gonna do it again. I'm gonna do it slowly, but pay attention at the vector scope this time and see how everything starts to expand equally. This not, the ratio from here to here didn't change, and that's 100%. That's I pushed it as much as I could, but let's keep it 100% so I can show you, or maybe let's go back to 75 so I can show you something which was more evident at 100, but it's not bad, is it? I mean, maybe, yeah, we can say the blue. It looks very video-y. But you can see, I'm sort of happy-ish with the greens behind. But you can see around here how pink, saturated pink starts getting. And the more I push it, the more evident it becomes that, all these pink values are, sorry, red, not pink. I'm gonna bring it back to 75 so you can live with this image. And actually, I'm gonna save this and I'm gonna label it as just plain sat. I'm gonna reset this and I'm gonna push this, the color boost. What the color boost does, just look at the vector scope before the image and you'll realize. I'm gonna push it very, very hard, very horrible. Can you see this? This like whirlpool here in the middle. What color boost does is it's gonna start saturating first the most desaturated colors in the image. So X and Y here in the very center, in this conversion we have pure white, we have white. So clearly it's starting to push from white outwards the saturation. And if you look here at the vector scope, I'm gonna do the same quickly with saturation, and you can see it's pushing everything equally, but it's not, it's not pushing it from here. Everything is being pushed outwards, so saturated. So in this case, it is sort of better in the sense that I'm gonna park it, say, at 25, where these greens are more or less getting closer, if not more saturated. I'm comparing the saturated version. Now let's do half and half. There we go. At 15, the greens, and you can see here in the vector scope, they don't change as much. But see what happens. I'm up, as I said, I was okay with the greens, so I like the greens. And this is the color boost version, and this is the saturation version. To refresh, I'm using here the gallery and showing this. So the greens are the same here in the vector scope. They don't change as much. What changes, not even the blues. The blues a little bit, or maybe just nothing. What changes are the reds. And this is the thing I prefer using color boost to saturation, where it will saturate first the most desaturated colors in the image. So in this case, where I didn't like the reddish tints on her face, and probably just look here and her nose. Yeah. So we still have saturation, but not as much as with color boost. So between these two, I take color boost. Okay, so that's method 1, which is reset this, and let's now go to the HDR panel. In the global, I've talked many times about the exposure and global wheel that I used for photometric exposure changes. But we have saturation wheel here as well, or slider. So I'm gonna try to push it very, very hard, so it goes up to 2 to sort of the maximum. Let's stay on her face. So this is the HDR, and this is the saturation. And you may say, yeah, I prefer the rendering of the saturation on her face. It's not that I prefer it. The HDR is giving the colors a little bit more density. You can see the face, which is the most prominent, so the most vibrant colors in the image, those reds in her nose. It becomes darker, so this is saturation, everything's a bit lighter. And you can see greens if you concentrate maybe in this area, how the saturation knob is brighter than the HDR saturation mode. Same for the blues. This is saturation and this is HDR saturation. Again, I wouldn't push the colors this far, so let's go maybe 1.5, and this image is already, to my eye, more pleasing than the saturated one. This image looks more video-y than this one, where the colors, and I can push it a bit further, that the colors 170, just to compare. Saturation is a bit more video-y. So there's color saturation, I would never ever use it. Color boost at a pinch, I can just boost those less saturated colors. If I'm feeling lazy, because when you open Davinci, it goes to the primaries. But if you have an extra second, yeah, I would go to saturation in the HDR palette on the global. So next method. So still on this node, I reset it, and I'm gonna label it. So if you're just jumping or skipping, you can see that changes. We're gonna talk about the HSV model or color model. If I said that with the HDR palette, as you saturate the colors, they become a bit more dense. So this is how it really is. It's done. Like HSV is the model where as you push the saturation, the more dense the colors get. And this is, just to explain a quick theory, this is the natural way. So let's suppose we have two, what do I have in front of me? I have two mugs, two teacups that are blue. But let's pretend that I have one that is a pale blue and the other one is a bit more saturated. When the light are hitting equally these two mugs, the more saturated one is going to reflect less light, and to our eyes it will appear that it's denser, that it's darker, so to speak. So that's physics, that's how it works. So this model, the HSV, it works more like that. To get into the HSV model, you can do it in any node. You have to right click, come to color space, select the HSV, and there's others like HSL. I'm gonna talk about the LAB. There's different models that you can play, XYZ, YUB, but HSV is hue, saturation, and value. We click here, and we don't want to change the hue nor the value. We only want to change the saturation. So in order to do that, we come to channels, and this H, this S, and this is V. So we want to unclick on channel 1 and 3, only having ticked channel 2. So we're working only in the saturation channel. And if you're going back to primaries, we can control the saturation with the gain wheel. The more we push saturation, and everything appears to be saturated, the denser the colors become, the darker, if you will. Yeah, so obviously, they become too saturated. It's not looking great, but you can see this just as an example. You can see how these reds are getting so deep. The blues are very deep. It's a much more natural way of saturating colors, and as you can see, they are becoming darker. Now the gain will just like the saturation wheel in a normal RGB node will saturate all the colors equally, and you can see in the vector scope how everything pushes symmetrically, if you will, until the blues are starting to get into clipped area. But more or less up to there, when everything's got detail, it's called it symmetrical or equal. The gamma, just like the, you can see, you can start seeing the concentric here, whirlpool. So it's just like pushing more the desaturated colors first. So for me, the gamma again would be a good way to introduce saturation and to darken those saturated areas. But yeah, I really like this image. Really, deep blues but saturated. Same with the greens and skin tone. For me, this is the one that acted the best for her skin tones. So this is our HSV image, and compared to the saturation slider, there's a huge difference. As I said before, this is more clearly digital, and this is a bit more filmic, if you will, organic. Yeah, not digital, like analog. Within the HSV, and I'm gonna reset this. There's another technique that you can do, which is just you can push the overall saturation, and then with the gamma bring down the mid saturation of it. And again, if we do saturation of this, just way more filmic, if you will. Because it's a subtractive saturation, and that's how film reacts. Let me create another node, and let's call this HSL, which is yet another color model. I'm gonna come to color space, HSL, do the same thing. We only want to affect the saturation, so it's channel 2. Yeah, so same thing, the curve. You have the gain for the overall sat, and you have the gamma for the saturation, starting from the colors that are less saturated. So let's compare it with what we did with HSV. So let's do the same method. I'm gonna push the gain quite a bit, and then roll it back with gamma, more or less there, and let's compare it with HSV. We can see how, as I said, HSV makes those colors denser, deeper. Okay, so let's do a test together. HSV, let's do 40, and HSL, same thing, 40. Yeah, 100%. So let me grab this still. So if you're gonna desaturate, I think HSL is a much better model for desaturation. And as you desaturate, it's subtle, but you can see that it's making the colors denser. So HSV desaturating is not affecting the density as much, and HSL it is. It's quite cool actually what it's doing. But it's rare the times that I get an image that is so saturated from the get-go that I need to use the HSL method to desaturate. And if I were to do a black and white image, I would probably start with the matrix, come here, and then channel by channel we can make those colors denser. So skin, obviously the reds, it can come dark like that. Okay, you do the opposite, like brighten the greens. This is quite a good example because we have the blue, the green, and the reds. And yeah, I'm making those blue dense as well. I kind of like this look. So yeah, if I were to do a pure black and white image, this is the way I would do it in the matrix 3x3 and convert it to monochrome. That's cool. That is HSL, which is my fourth method. So we started again with just plain saturation. Second one was the HDR panel. Third one, HSV model. Fourth, HSL model. But by the way, if you this sat, where it starts here, the lume versus sat versus sat, sat v lume, these are HSL models. Find it when you saturate on HSL, it becomes more pastely, the colors. So yeah, different looks. I like organic vintage, let's call it filming. So yeah, I prefer the HSV, where as it gets more saturation, the colors get a bit denser. Okay, so for my last method, I'm gonna use this image, which is great because it's got skin tones, greens, blues, different type of skin tones, the color chart, so we can see how all these colors react to what I'm gonna show you. So there's something in DaVinci within the effects called DCTL, which stands for DaVinci Color Transform Language, which is a programming language where color scientists use to come up with tools using all the DaVinci mathematical power and programming tools that are not in DaVinci, or things that DaVinci by the tools we're given by default we can't achieve, or we can't achieve as easily. And I'll give you a quick example. So let's drag this as an effect into a saturation node, and I'm gonna show you a free DCTL that I'm gonna include. I'm gonna leave the link in the comments. So if you wanna download it and play with this, it is for free and you can download it right now. So once you download this, it's gonna be a DCTL file. You come here to your settings, project settings, color management, open LAT folder, and you can drag that DCTL inside this DCTL folder, and you can drag it here. You don't have to update the list, but you have to restart DaVinci. So you need to close the program and open it back again. And at the time you come here to DCTL drop down, you'll see your new DCTL. So this is a simple density, film density. I'm gonna bring this a bit bigger so you can see what it's doing to the whole image. So all the colors are becoming denser. Pay attention to the color chart and skin tones, and you can see that they're becoming denser. If you see here the graph, and this is interesting, you may think they're becoming, or they are becoming more desaturated in terms of color and brightness, but to the naked eye, to the eye, if you see the image, by making the colors denser, they are becoming more saturated. Especially the red. Look at the red. Yeah. So we're adding just density at this time, not so much saturation. This is just density. So this is an overall density, and then it's split in 3 channels. The red channel, so making the reds more dense, less dense. The greens and the blues, you can see here, and then you can tweak this by luminance. So at the moment, as you can see, everything's been applied to the white, so to the whole image, but you can start tweaking the luminance. So nothing's been applied to the brightest areas of the image, and all the way to this the darkest areas of the image, and you can limit, you know, the low end as well. So you can, you know, sort of come here and do just the midtones. It's not the cleanest, you can see. There is not the cleanest of selection. That's why I don't tend to use it. And then, as every other effect, you have a global blend where you can blend the overall effect. But yeah, but it's not bad. You know, it's giving to the whole image a bit of density, and I think it's quite nice. But let me show you. And for this example, I'm going to jump into a timeline, and I already created a node before my ODT called Color Density. And this is something I usually use for look development, so it's consistent throughout the film. I'm gonna use one that's called Pixel Tools and the Hue Shift, and this is a demo. It's not the full paid version. I have it in a different computer, but I'm not being sponsored or paid by Pixel Tools. I decided just to use the demo, which you can also download for free. So this thing that I'm gonna showcase here to show you, you can go ahead, download it right now from Pixel Tools website, and you'll see this. So you can carry on playing or seeing me play in front of you. Okay, so as you can see, this is a much better DCTL. It's called colors, and colors are very nice and visual. So you have many more options. You have a complete global saturation and saturation. I mean, it's a bit hard, isn't it? But it's the HSV model, because you can see that as I push saturation, it's making the colors darker. And I'm gonna probably park it there a little bit. Yeah, before and after. It's a shame that we have the dots there. Yeah, you can see what it's doing, probably even a bit less. And then I'm gonna bypass at the moment all, you know, the colors where we have red, green, blue, cyan, magenta, green, yellow, all the colors. But then we have this, which is very, very cool, and it's not as easy to do it in just plain Davinci. As I said, we're in Subtractive right now to the left, and this, you know, is basically an HSV model. But if we push this to the right, it's becoming additive. So if we push this, the colors don't become as dense. So you don't have to go all the way dense. You can have, you know, you can play with it and park it. Okay, 50-50, not super dense. I'll leave the overall density addition sort of split in the middle. And this is something to even go less deep with the colors. Or as deep as possible. And again, we can push this and leave it somewhere there. You can bypass the whole thing, so probably this is better for before and after. So we keep the demo dots in there. So you can see, you know, the reds in the image as, you know, as alpha, the greens, the blues, all the colors, the yellows, which include a bit of a green as well, and the skin vector, you know, just this one here, and we can see that the colors in the skin are pretty much spot on. And then yeah, we can start tweaking hue, sat, and density per color channel. The equal to this in a much more complicated way would be to use here the curve, the hue versus hue. It's only changing the hue. Then the hue versus sat, only changing the sat, and then the hue versus luminance, sort of adding density, making the colors, the hues darker. So sliders are much quicker than just jumping, selecting a color, making, in this case, let's go with a hue towards, let's make it obvious, towards magenta, same selection, let's oversaturate this, same selection, let's make it darker. Yeah, so that time that it took me to do all these three changes, it would take me to do hue, boom, more sat, denser. And you can see that I can go way further to what this provides. Super quick. Yes, you could do something similar in the warper. So select the hue, and we have the hue change, we have the saturation, and we have the luminance. But let me tell you, it's way more difficult to achieve cleaner results in the warper than doing it here. So I mean, just for the sake of example, let me just capture this one, and let's reset and do exactly the same. So hue towards the, I'm going more or less there, more saturation and density, and it wasn't this saturated or dense whatsoever. But let me, yeah, there you go, before and after, and see how much cleaner this selection without making a selection is compared to what we achieved with and the separation, right? Because this, even with the warper, even got these reds. You know, obviously we can tweak this, but all these tweaks take time. So actually for me, the DCTLs are time savers. So the less time you spend in creating a look or on each clip by clip basis, the more you get done and the same money you get. So you get to get home faster. But if you don't have DCTL by any means, you can use the hue versus hue, sat, luminance sliders, and the color warper. Spend more time refining, and you might get to a similar-ish look. Spending more time. Reds, we can make them. We can take them where we want. So let's make them, you know, just change the more sat, way denser, and greens. We can see, you know, her top, and we can start creating like certain, and I'm pushing it too far, but it doesn't matter. It's this demonstration sake. Blues, the background, I feel more cyan, but I want them very, very dark. I like dark blues, and sad, maybe just a bit less sad. Cyans, you can see here in this swatch here, this cyan is quite good. I'm gonna make it super saturated. Asteroid City, and a bit darker. Magentas, yeah, there's not a lot around, just around those blues, so I'm gonna make it just denser, so it becomes a bit more blended with the blues. We have these yellows, so these yellows are affecting our greens as well, but I like what they're doing. And the hue, you know, with the face here is really cute. I'm pretty happy with the skin tones, but let's say we want them a bit more rosy, because that's the effect we're going for, right? Bit less saturated, but a bit darker, denser. Let's roll back the saturation of the lips. I guess it's becoming a bit too obvious, but yeah, I mean, maybe going for that. You know, there's something about the reds in this film, reds, magentas. And yeah, so we got, you know, this is a look, right? Like, this is our Rec 09, and this is the look of our film. And you can see how these colors, especially the red, the cyan, starts looking, not the contrast, but quite pastely, like Asteroid City. So you can create looks very, very easily with this tool. And then yeah, if you want to just refine and see the vectors, which is, you know, these colors, what they're actually affecting your image, so you can make more informed decisions about what you're changing, what you change. You know, this blue is going to affect a little bit to all these colors here, especially cyan. Wish it was more just dedicated to the deep blues, but you can always mask and you know, do several things. But this is amazing. And as I said, like every other plugin effect or whatever, you can blend things. So if you think, you know, you went too far, and I like it going too far, you can blend it back. But for demonstration's sake, they actually deep. Let's do deep. Yeah, for demonstration, I don't know. Yeah, let's do deep. Yeah, for demonstration's sake, the more I push the image, the more it becomes evident to you. So I mean, this is, I may just move this into my paid version and save the look because I like what I'm seeing. Maybe. Okay, guys, I hope you like it. If you go and buy a lot of these pixel tools, DCTLs, let me know first so I can let the chaps know and get a bit of money back, or maybe a free DCTL because I made them make a lot of money, or maybe not. Anyway, hope you had a great time. See you next time. Bye.